Against the backdrop of a large-scale fuel crisis, Russia is returning to the Soviet Union. Today, July 10, it emerged that the Russian authorities are considering the possibility of bringing back the practice of exit visas. The very same ones that existed in the Soviet Union. That means you need to get a visa in order to leave the country. Without it, just like in Soviet times, you simply won't be allowed to leave. Soon, buying a ticket and just flying out of Russia may become impossible. The government wants to decide who can leave and who can't. This is a direct path to mass mobilization, which everyone is talking about openly again. Meanwhile, the government of the Russian Federation has finally admitted that there isn't enough gasoline for everyone. Today, Russia is only able to produce 65% of its domestic demand. It has gotten to the point where, in 5 regions of Russia, the authorities have sent armed security forces to protect gas stations from Russians. And against this backdrop, more and more sources indicate that Vladimir Putin is deliberately preparing for a new wave of escalation, as the war has become a matter of principle for him. Let's figure out what's happening, why it's happening right now, and how all of this fits together into a single picture. With burning oil refineries, gas lines, with rumors of mobilization and preparations for a new escalation. Most importantly, why does Putin actually need so-called exit visas for absolutely all Russians? My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss all these topics together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video. And friends, I urge you to definitely subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 300,000 subscribers. Become a part of our community as well. So, let's start with the biggest news of today. The biggest news of July 10th. The publication Możemy Objaśnić, citing a source in diplomatic circles and a source close to President Putin's administration, writes that the Kremlin is preparing a ban on leaving the country without a special exit visa. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is preparing a package of documents for the corresponding bill. And it is doing this under the pretext of strengthening the security of Russian citizens abroad. The wording itself is straight out of some Orwell book. To protect Russian citizens abroad, what should you do? Just stop letting them leave. If a Russian doesn't go abroad, then everything will be fine with him. And now the details of the Kremlin's new initiative are becoming truly frightening. They plan to introduce so-called tourist exit visas. According to the new rules, Russians will only be able to travel to unfriendly NATO countries in organized groups of at least 10 people and along a pre-approved route. Well, exactly like it was during the Soviet Union. For other countries, whose list is still being drawn up, individual tourism will still be possible, but an exit visa will be required in any case. And here's a quote from one of the sources that conveys the entire philosophy of this new system. The way it is now, where you just buy a ticket and fly, shouldn't be allowed. The government should grant permission to leave. And to understand how serious this rollback is, we just need to remember history. The ban on traveling abroad appeared in Russia during Stalin's era. In 1935, a law was passed that equated fleeing abroad with treason, which was punishable by death. And until 1991, in order to travel abroad, Soviet citizens had to go through numerous approvals and obtain permission. That very exit visa. In other words, we're talking about bringing back a mechanism that was last used in the Soviet Union. It's important to note that these rumors were already circulating at the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. In July 2022, a representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Alexei Zaitsev, assured, quote, "There are no plans to introduce any special exit visas." At that time, he also pointed out that the right to freely leave the country and return is guaranteed by Article 27 of the Constitution. And it can only be restricted if a person is suspected of a crime or if martial law is declared in the country. And since then, reality has changed after all. The mechanisms for restricting departure are already built into the law on electronic draft notices, which has been in effect since 2023. This law allows a person to be banned from leaving the country as soon as the draft notice appears in the electronic registry of the Ministry of Defense. And under martial law, which has already been introduced in the occupied regions of Ukraine, the travel ban can be extended much further. But such news overlaps with others. While Russia is building a wall from the inside, Europe is building one from the outside and wants to leave Russians, like spiders in a jar. Here is an important turning point that makes the situation truly hopeless for Russians. Well, for now, of course, there are options, but it will only get worse. While Moscow is thinking about how not to let its citizens out, the European Union is deciding which of them not to let in. On the same day, July 10, it became known that the countries of the European Union agreed on a new version of the ban on issuing visas to Russian military personnel as part of the 21st package of sanctions. Initially, the European Commission proposed to ban entry to all Russian citizens who had served in the armed forces or participated in military actions. The initial version applied to everyone who played any role in the Russian army, including administrative and logistical functions, with an exception only for deserters. However, the initiative was softened after objections from France, Italy, and Greece. As a result, the ban was narrowed to short-term visas for those who directly participated in the war against Ukraine after February 2022. Paris and Rome pointed out a reasonable thing. Russia has mandatory conscription, and a broad ban would have effectively applied to all men who have completed their mandatory military service. But, as you can see, the direction is obvious. Europe is closing itself off from Russians connected to the war, and Russia is closing itself off as well. A person in the system is trapped, their country won't let them leave, and other countries won't let them enter. And now to the main question, why has the discussion about exit visas come up right now? To answer that, we need to look at what's actually happening inside Russia itself. And in Russia, there's a fuel crisis that the authorities officially acknowledged for the first time today. Words that would have been unthinkable coming from a Russian official just a month ago were spoken today by Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak. And here is his quote. "We have to admit that there are problems in the fuel market and there is a shortage, because of which we are seeing lines or sometimes gas stations aren't operating reliably." He named the reason directly. Plants are going out of service because of drone strikes. And here's what's telling. This admission from Novak came after weeks of denial. Just 2 days ago, at a meeting with Vladimir Putin, this same Alexander Novak claimed that the situation was stabilizing. On July 1st, he assured that the market, quote, was generally supplied. On June 26th, he blamed it all on panic buying and artificial demand. He said that, in fact, there's plenty of gasoline, it's just that there's nowhere to put it, but Russians themselves created this buying frenzy, and actually, the situation is really good. Well, now he finally admits that yes, there really is a gasoline shortage after all. Reality turned out to be, as they say, much stronger than propaganda. So, no Solovyov or Skabayeva can convince a Russian waiting in line at the gas station that there's plenty of gasoline, and the situation is just great. The scale of this reality in numbers, and these numbers are shocking. I should say it's a pleasant surprise. Gasoline production this week has dropped to 65% of the average summer consumption level. To put it in simple terms, gasoline output has plummeted to 75,000 tons per day, while Russians consume about 120,000 tons per day during the same period. To emphasize, this only concerns the domestic market. The gap between production and market demand reaches 40 to 45,000 tons per day, or about 35%. And now, pay attention. Back in June, the gap was estimated at 25%. So, this gap is growing rapidly and continuously. A few more strikes on the oil refineries, and the situation will become completely catastrophic. That is, as of today, a third of the market can't be supplied at all. And now Ukrainian drones are knocking out one plant after another. For example, on July 6, the Omsk oil refinery was shut down. This is the most powerful oil refinery in Russia and the last of the top 10 that had previously remained out of reach for Ukrainian strikes. Since July 2nd, Nizhny Novgorod Nefteogsyntes has been shut down. It's the second largest gasoline producer in the country. Since July 8th, the Saratov oil refinery has stopped receiving oil. And according to energy intelligence estimates, half of all oil refining capacity in Russia is currently idle. And refinery utilization has dropped to levels the economy hasn't seen since the late 1990s. Gasoline production has decreased by at least 25% over the year, and diesel by almost 40%. And that's what national humiliation looks like. The oil superpower has started importing gasoline by sea from India. And the missing volumes are being covered by supplies from Belarus, which increased them to a record level in June. The government has already taken desperate measures and even banned the export of diesel fuel. And, importantly, it allowed the production of lower quality gasoline and diesel. And today, something happened in Russia that is typical for any totalitarian regime. The Kremlin has started to fight the gasoline shortage with batons. Today it became known that the Kirov region of the Russian Federation has already become the 5th region where armed patrols have been sent to gas stations. The wording of the local authorities sounds almost comical. To maintain order at gas stations, patrol units, traffic police officers, and the National Guard will now be on duty constantly. The Kirov region is following in the footsteps of Kuban, Transbaikalia, Novosibirsk, and the Irkutsk region. Moreover, the situation across the country is simply surreal. While in Kuban and the Novosibirsk region, Cossacks, volunteers, and so-called civilian patrols are on duty at gas stations. In other regions, attention, the police and the National Guard have been deployed at gas stations. In the Irkutsk region, law enforcement is patrolling the lines around the clock and already detaining so-called scalpers. Direct rationing is also being introduced. It's just like wartime. In the Kirov region, starting from July 11, fuel will be distributed according to the odd-even principle. On even days, cars with even license plates can refuel, and on odd days, those with odd numbers. It's getting absurd. The authorities complain that almost half of the drivers supposedly come just to top up their tanks with only 1 to 10 liters of gasoline, which creates lines. So, what used to be normal is now a problem that needs to be solved with the help of law enforcement. Now let's put the whole puzzle together. Why would a government whose factories are burning and whose car tanks are running empty suddenly need to lock its own citizens inside the country and bring back so-called exit visas? The answer is that the fuel crisis is just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath it is the preparation for something people will actually want to run away from. First, mobilization. Rumors about a new wave of conscription are already spreading in Z channels. Numbers like 1 or 2 million people are being mentioned, with the October as the time frame. Well, does this concern Ukrainians? Right after the September elections to the State Duma. The logic here is, first the elections, then all the unpopular decisions. And here, exit visas combine with mobilization into a single mechanism. Let me remind you, the law on electronic draft notices already allows a person to be instantly banned from leaving the country, and exit visas simply close the last loophole. That is, the ability to simply buy a ticket and leave before the draft notice catches up with you. The government wants the doors to be completely locked by the time the new wave of mobilization begins. Second, escalation. All of this is not a sign, of a country that is going to end the war. These are signs of a country that is preparing to continue and expand it. That's why there's a general atmosphere of militarization, even in everyday life. For example, in St. Petersburg, they have already started looking for people to shoot down drones. The state is putting society completely on a war footing, and at the same time, what is it doing? It's blocking all the exits. And the logic of modern Russia is becoming more and more like the worst logic of the Soviet Union. The worse things get, the stronger the locks become. Admitting the fuel shortage, law enforcement at gas stations, gasoline rationing, these rumors about mobilization and the exit visa project, as you can see, are not just isolated reports. These are elements of a single strategy to keep people inside and mobilize all their resources, human, material, financial, and so on. And all this is for the war that the Kremlin has no intention of stopping. So let's sum it up. In just one day, July 10, we saw how a new reality is taking shape for Russians. The government is considering reinstating Stalin-era exit visas, making leaving the country require state permission instead of being a right. Europe is closing its doors to those involved in the war, while the Russian government admits to a fuel shortage for the first time. Gasoline production has dropped to 2/3 of what's needed, and at gas stations, instead of fuel, there are now raffles, the National Guard and the police. And over all of this, there are rumors of mobilization. Well, it's obvious that the Kremlin is preparing not for peace, but for a new round of war. And the first thing the government does when preparing to drive people to the front is to lock all the exits in advance. Because many will want to leave the camp that Russia is increasingly becoming. And the government's goal is to make sure that no one can... I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. And if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.